What still unfolding story connects the names of Abraham and Jesus to an Israeli landscape that was known in antiquity as Galilee of the Gentiles, and in the predictions of Jewish prophets as the place where the armies of the earth would gather in one great end-time battle? Whether you visited this land for yourself or dreamed of doing so, we invite you to join us for a road tour of the land and amazing story of the Bible, the Lower Galilee, on this day of discovery. This is the land of the Bible, Galilee, today a popular vacation spot for modern Israelis and a magnet to visitors from around the world. Here, modern highways still follow the paths of ancient roads that once connected the continents of Africa, Asia, and Europe. Now, however, the horsepower of finely tuned engines replaces the footfall and clatter of Egyptian, Greek, and Roman chariots. Security has been a long-standing issue in the region. In ancient times, Assyrian and Babylonian armies invaded the land of Israel through this northern passage. Later, Arab Muslims, European Crusaders, and Turks clashed here. Today, the lakeshore city of Tiberias remains in the shadow of the looming and often contested Golan Heights on its eastern shore. And it is here on the shore of Lake Kinneret, or the Sea of Galilee as it is known in the Bible, that Mark Tihan and Jimmy Dion are getting ready for a day in the Lower Galilee to revisit some of the most important chapters of the greatest story ever told.
You know what? Those gulls remind me of Lake Michigan.
Except we're here on the Sea of Galilee, just outside of Tiberias, getting ready for our trip today.
Got a clear morning.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Hey, got the keys?
Certainly do. Would
You
like
drive.
to drive?
How you drive?
Okay. I'll tell you what, though, we better go over how we're going to make our journey here. Get the old faithful map out. Bart, do you? Yeah. Here we are. Now we're basically right here at Tiberias. Come down, start into the Jordan Valley going south.
Right. Okay.
This is where the Jordan River comes out, and this is the Jordan Valley. Make our way down here to the location of Mount Gilboa, actually the location where the first king of Israel, King Saul and his 3 sons, were killed by the Philistines. Then we turn right, go west. This is actually a strategic junction right here too, because you've got the Jordan Valley, you have the Jezreel Valley they come in perpendicular to each other. So we start west, we make our way over to Tel Jezreel, another king of Israel, Ahab. And you heard about Jezebel, haven't you?
I've heard about Jezebel.
Elijah and all the confrontation they had there. Then across the beautiful, fertile fields of the Jezreel Valley, up towards, and then into the mountains of Nazareth, and then over here to Cana of Galilee. Then make our way across back towards Tiberias and come to the Arbel Pass. So beautiful as you enter into the Sea of Galilee.
Okay, and then back to Tiberias.
Yes.
Right? Okay, and the reason we're doing this? Because all of these events that Jim has just described are like chapters in a great story. And what's interesting about this story is that it's about a bigger story that's been lost. But right here in Israel, that story can be found. And Jim and I are going to walk with you through that unfolding great story of history today together. You ready?
Yes, sir.
Let's go for it.
You fold the map and I'll
Okay,
get ready
I got
to
it.
drive.
Because of Galilee's fertile land, its location at the crossroads of many ancient highways, and its great freshwater lake, it was always a strategic military hotspot for clashing nations and occupying armies. For that reason, it was known in Bible times as Galilee of the Gentiles, or Galilee of the Nations. This region was a place in Israel where breaking news would travel not only to Jewish homes, but to the outside world as well.
In terms of openness for people moving through, and so on, the Galilee is the best. That is to say, the Galilee has this great series of east-west, broad, flat, low valleys, doorways, you might say, by which you can go from the sea route to the land route most easily, bypassing a lot of the obstacles. That happens to be the Galilee. In particular, it happens to be the Jezreel Valley, the great crossroads, you might say, of antiquity in this part of the world, and to a lesser extent, some of the other valleys of the Galilee. It's not an accident that Isaiah called this region in Isaiah 9, verse 1, the Galilee of the Gentiles, or the Galilee of the nations.
The name Galilee appears to come from a Hebrew word meaning to encircle. And we know it also from the Bible as being the Galilee of the Gentiles, and certainly in Jesus' day, Galilee was an area where there were high population of Gentiles. This is essentially an area that is bordered by the Litani River in the north, which is in Lebanon, southern Lebanon today. At the southern end, you have the Jezreel Valley. On the west, you have the Mediterranean Sea. And on the east, you have the Jordan Valley. So these four main geographical features more or less outline the biblical Galilee. You can divide it easily into two portions. What's known as Upper Galilee, where all the elevations are 3,000 feet and higher, and Lower Galilee, where all the elevations are about 2,000 feet and lower. And in Lower Galilee, you have, for example, Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. And from Nazareth, you can look out over the hills, and you can see really how low-lying these mountains are, compared to the higher uplifted region of Upper Galilee beyond in the north. And on a clear day, you can see Upper Galilee from good points of view in Nazareth.
Biblically, the boundaries are a little bit more flexible, you might say, and they tend to ebb and flow depending on which local power happens to be here. In the time of the New Testament, the word Galilee was very specific. It was a district on the western side of the Sea of Galilee, including a very small portion of the Jezreel Valley, including a series of ridges going east and west, running north of the Jezreel Valley, or laying north of the Jezreel Valley, and some higher hills to the north of that, but did not include anything toward the coast. A district that was governed by a fellow named Herod Antipas. The district of Galilee is the way it's described technically in the Gospels.
We've come up from the Jordan Valley on our journey today, here to the mountain range known as Mount Gilboa, which is the border for the Jezreel Valley here in the southeastern section of it, where the Jordan Valley and the Jezreel Valley come together. On this mountain ridge, someplace along here, the Bible story that took place 3,000 years ago of the first king of Israel, King Saul, meeting his death, went under attack from the Philistines. Here it was that King Saul, his 3 sons were killed, and later the Philistines took them to the community down in the valley there, Bet-Shan, and attached their bodies to the wall.
The Philistines had come all the way up through the Jezreel Valley to separate the northern and southern tribes of Israel and choke Israel, the northern and southern tribes, from each other, isolate them, and really take over the Egyptian presence that had been there previous, all the way to Beit-Shan. Beit-Shan, a rather large Canaanite city-state, like Megiddo, by the way, lying right there where the Jezreel Valley system dumps out into the Rift Valley. In the time of the New Testament, it had a Hellenistic name, the site, Skytopolis, and was becoming a rather large and impressive Hellenistic Decapolis city with all the elements that you would have in Rome itself: theaters, cardos, hippodromes, Roman baths, columns, the whole bit.
It's interesting watching a little calf suckle from his mother here on the Gilboa Range. If you think about it, Kath is sometimes smarter than we are. We can so easily forget who our provider is and our purpose for being here. In fact, that's what the story of the Bible is all about.
Saul and his sons lost their lives around here somewhere. And why? Because they were part of a nation, part of a family that had forgotten the big story, where they had come from, why they were here, and where they were going. The result was tragic. You have to ask the question, why does a good book tell us stories like this? I think it's because our source, our creator, wants us to sit and reflect, to live and to reflect about where we came from and what this journey called life is all about and where it's going. That's what the story of Saul and his death on Mount Gilboa is all about. He'd forgotten the big story. He'd worshipped himself. He'd been far more concerned about protecting himself and trying to make provisions for his own rule than entrusting that God, the great king who had given him his position of leadership in Israel. That's not just, these aren't just events. This is part of the greatest story ever told, and it's for us to reflect on what it all means for us.
While reflecting on the death of Saul and his sons here on the slopes of Gilboa, a group of Israeli mourners parked their cars along the road and gathered for the burial of a loved one. What kind of meaning was there in the life and death of the one being buried here today? As I watched the funeral procession form in the distance, it seemed like the reality of Saul's tragic death was being reenacted before us. While many years separated us from the death of the father and sons who died in this mountain, I knew I wasn't far removed from the same attitudes that brought Saul to such a bitter end.
The prophet Samuel said to Saul, "You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel." 1 Samuel chapter 15.
Yes, in many ways what happened to Saul and his sons here on this mountain is a story about another family living a long time ago. And yet in the quiet of this Galilee overlook, I also sensed that what happened here was giving me today a vision of God and a new look into my own heart. From the Philistine killing fields of Mount Gilboa, Jimmy and I headed toward another overlook of the Jezreel Valley, the apparent location of history's last chapters in the final battle between the forces of good and evil, Armageddon.
The Jezreel Valley is a very expansive valley, very flat, tends to get waterlogged. Nowadays the water is channeled, the valley is dried out to the extent that the whole thing can be used for agriculture. And even though it's the agricultural breadbasket of Israel today, we can say the same thing about biblical times. Even though all of it might not have been usable, enough of it was. In fact, King Herod appropriated the valley as his own estate, his own landed estate, in the time of the Gospels. He's the king, he can do what he wants. He takes the best.
It didn't take us long to descend from the wildflower-covered heights of Mount Gilboa to Tel Jezreel, lying on a low western spur of the mountain.
The point where the Jezreel Valley itself dumps out through the narrow pass down to Beit Shan is a strategic spot. There is a site there, an ancient site there, called Jezreel, Tel Jezreel, the modern name. This is a juncture point, an important trade point as well. It was here that King Ahab built a palace for himself, a winter palace. The weather is nicer here than in his regular palace in the hill country of Samaria during the winter time. Built a nice fortified palace. People were attracted to the palace, started to live up next to it, and the town started to grow.
The dig taking place here has been a slow, painstaking effort to find physical links to the notorious Jewish King Ahab who built his winter palace here. Ahab was one of the northern kings of Israel who ruled the regions of Samaria and Galilee after 10 of the northern tribes seceded from the southern kingdom of Judah. Today I have some of the same feelings about Ahab that I did standing on Gilboa. The biblical record tells us that Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than did all of the kings of Israel before him. Ahab repeated the mistakes of Saul, and like the first king of Israel, brought pain and disgrace not only on himself, but on the family and nation that depended on him. Somewhere to the east of here in the mountains of Gilead, Ahab bled to death in battle. And right here in Jezreel, Jezebel, Ahab's Phoenician wife, came to her own terrible end, being thrown from the tower of their winter palace. As prophesied by Elijah, Jezebel's body literally went to the dogs. I'll have to admit it was much easier for Jimmy and me to reflect on how this fertile valley has been Israel's breadbasket since Bible times. The meaning for the Hebrew word Jezreel fits its setting. It means God will sow the seed. Not the fertility god Baal worshipped by Ahab and Jezebel, but rather the one true God, who in so many ways chose the region of the Galilee to reveal himself as the King of Kings.
This is a wheat field here in the Jezreel Valley, the arrowhead-shaped valley between the mountains of Gilboa and Carmel, mountains of Nazareth. In fact, the cities that surround this valley give the significance of how important this piece of real estate is. In biblical times, this was a crossroads for the travelers, the tradesmen, the military coming out of Egypt on their way to Mesopotamia. This actually is going to be the crossroads to the world, according to Bible prophecy. The book of Revelation talks about all the nations of the world gathered here in the Jezreel Valley for that Battle of Armageddon.
The drive from Tel Jezreel to our next location in Lower Galilee was marked by contrast. Not only were we moving from the valley floor up into the hills, but now we were also moving across hundreds of years to the hometown of a far different kind of king. Road signs to our destination confirmed that we were driving into the hills of the hometown of Jesus of Nazareth. From hills that Jesus must have played on as a boy, we stared into the fertile and prophetically significant Jezreel Valley below. History, present, and future all merged here in ways far greater than I could absorb. What also impressed me was how different Nazareth was from the small village that Jesus had grown up in. Modern Nazareth had spread down its slopes to virtually encompass what used to be a separate town, the town of Cana.
This is the modern-day city of Cana, a Galilean village in the times of Jesus Christ. It's down the slopes from Nazareth, west of Tiberias, where we started our journey this morning. The Bible records in the Gospel of John, chapter 2, a very famous wedding took place here. In fact, here in Cana of Galilee, there are several locations, the traditional sites for that wedding. Jesus Christ and his disciples visited that wedding here in Cana of Galilee.
We find Jesus opening his ministry at Cana, where he goes to a wedding. The site of Cana has been suggested to be in two different locations. You could say the church traditional site, where the Byzantine churches and so on were located, is on the slope of the Nazareth Ridge. The city of Cana is there today, a modern city called Cana. And the other possibility is just a tell on not much excavation. Nobody lives there today. It's on the outside of a rather large Arab village, Kfar Manda.
It was here that Jesus Christ performed the first of many miracles during his public ministry. Jesus Christ and his disciples visited that wedding feast, the celebration going on here in Cana of Galilee, and he turned the water into wine. Cana of Galilee, famous for a very important wedding.
The nicest section of Lower Galilee, other than the sea itself, is a valley lying just north of the Nazareth Ridge. Today it's called the Beit Netophah Valley. It was centered around, you could say, centered around the city of Sepphoris in the time of the New Testament. Hanathon was the Old Testament site, gathering up the valley. And it's a valley mostly of towns and villages, agriculture, small village agriculture, that sort of thing. Jesus, as he would wander as a youth and as a young adult, probably not only gazed into the Jezreel Valley, but into this northern Beit Netophah Valley as well. We find him telling parables later on in life, many of which are centered on village life, agricultural life, a farmer sowing seed, village women looking for lost coins, that kind of thing, landed tenants, absentee landlords, those sorts of things. And all of that has a setting, you could say, in this Lower Galilee area, in these agricultural valleys, the small towns.
As we leave behind our all too brief visit to Nazareth and Cana, the significance of what the gospel writers say happened here lingers. It was in Nazareth that Jesus grew up in obscurity. It was in Nazareth that he announced in the local synagogue that the long-awaited Messiah had come. And it was just down the road in Cana that, according to the gospel account, he did the first of so many miracles. Combined with the amazing claims he made about himself, those miracles led so many in his day to realize that madmen and liars don't heal shriveled legs or turn water into wine. From Cana, we drove east toward the Sea of Galilee, just one day's walk in Jesus' time, to our final destination, the Arbel Pass.
As one approaches the Arbel Pass from the direction of Nazareth, one has to keep in mind that to get down to the Sea of Galilee, you're going to drop down very deep in elevation, because the Sea of Galilee itself sits in a very deep trough known as the Jordan Valley, which is a part of the Great Syro-African Rift. So what that means is that you're going to be making a very dramatic drop down to the Sea of Galilee. And you see this as you approach the pass. You can, from the top, already see the hills of the Golan Heights in the distance, and you can see the big drop down to the Sea of Galilee.
We've come full circle today on our journey, starting on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, making our way south down the Jordan Valley to where the Jezreel Valley comes in to these two unique valleys here in the land of Israel, and then up to Mount Gilboa, the site where Saul met his death, his sons. Many locations as we travel through the Jezreel Valley, stopping there in the fertile fields, going over then to Cana of Galilee and the other sites that we were able to see as we traveled together. Coming back now here to the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee through the Arbel Pass behind me. Most likely the travel route that Jesus and his disciples would have made from Nazareth, his hometown, into the 3.5-year location of his public ministry there in Capernaum.
In many ways, the story of the Bible, the great story of history, is like a trip. It has a beginning, has a journey, has an end. In the middle, there's a great sense of loss. And as we've seen today, as we've talked about some of the tragic moments of human history, we've also been reminded that it was moving toward a time when a man would walk through this valley, down to the shores of Galilee, call men and women to himself, to listen to him, to follow him. He's still doing it today. That story is not complete because there's still a promised restoration of all things, a return to Eden and an invitation for each one of us to be a part of that happy ending. The choice is ours. We're still a part of that journey. We're still moving. Something for all of us to think about.